Welcome to Justice Beyond the Bench, a podcast by the International Association of Women Judges. I'm Jane Charles Voltaire.
And I'm Amy Lewis. In this series, we spotlight women across the global justice sector who are leading efforts to advance gender equality, strengthen judicial systems, and champion inclusive leadership.
From courtrooms to communities, we'll hear powerful stories and unpack the strategies shaping women's leadership in law and the judiciary. It's time to go beyond the bench.
Today, we're honored to be joined by Chief Justice of Nigeria, Kudirat Kekere-Ekun. She's the second woman to hold this position, and she earned her law degree from the University of Lagos in 1980, where she was called to the Nigerian bar in 1981, and later obtained a master's degree in law from the London School of Economics in 1983.
Chief Justice Kekere-Ekun's distinguished legal career spans over 4 decades. Beginning in the Lagos State Judiciary as a magistrate, she was appointed a judge of the High Court of Lagos State on July 19, 1996, and elevated to the Court of Appeal in September 2004. In 2013, she was appointed to the Supreme Court of Nigeria.
She previously served as president of the National Association of Women Judges of Nigeria, where she demonstrated strong leadership in advancing women's representation in the judiciary and reaffirmed her steadfast commitment to upholding the rule of law.
Her commitment to the judiciary has been recognized nationally. She received the Lagos State Judiciary Merit Award twice, in 2003 and in 2013, and was also honored with the Distinguished Trailblazer Award by the Nigerian Bar Association Women Forum in both 2012 and 2014. Chief Justice Kekere-Ekun, welcome to Justice Beyond the Bench, Supreme Voices, Women Shaping the Highest Courts, Justice Integrity and Gender Equality in Nigeria's Judiciary. Welcome.
Thank you, Jane and Amy. Very nice to be speaking with you. And I'm happy I've had the pleasure of meeting both of you in person. So I think this makes it a lot easier. Thank you.
Yes. So wonderful to be speaking with you again.
Exactly. And thank you again for, having welcomed us both at different occasions to the wonderful country of Nigeria. And we're very excited for this conversation today. So just to kind of start things off, we'd love to hear about the story of your path to first becoming a lawyer and then eventually a judge. Was there a moment when you really knew that this was your calling?
Thank you very much. So growing up, I actually had 2 passions. One was the law and one was languages. So when I finished my high school, I was sort of at a crossroads which one to do. And at that time, it was a bit more glamorous to study languages, have the idea of traveling the world, interpreting and working at the UN. That seemed to be attractive to me. So I actually spent a year exploring that. But then I later came back and decided that the law was what I wanted to study. Interestingly, growing up, a lot of people had predicted that I would be a lawyer because I was very outspoken as a child. I was born in England, but brought to Nigeria at the age of about 7.5. And so I was a bit more outspoken than a lot of the children that, I met in Nigeria. And I was also very passionate about defending rights. My mother would tell me stories of how we'd be walking, going on a walk, and I would make her stop and I would challenge the African custom of carrying babies on your back. Because for me, I thought the child was suffocating and I wanted my mom to rescue the child. So, growing up, those had been, things that were part of my characteristics. Anyway, I eventually ended up going to the University of Lagos and studying law. And when after I was called to the bar and I had done my national youth service, I went into what we call private practice. So I was going to court, prosecuting cases. But at a point in time, I had a young family. So I got to a point where I found it a bit difficult to cope with my young family going to work because we spent long hours in chambers and we also used to go to the chambers on Saturdays. I found that a bit inconvenient. And I had a friend then who was a magistrate. We had gone through school together, high school, uni and all that. And she just suggested, oh, why don't you apply to the bench? And sincerely, that was how I applied to become a magistrate. Mostly it was because I wanted more time with my children or for my children. So that was how I became a magistrate. And then while as a magistrate, I was approached for appointment to the bench. At the time I was approached, I hadn't even thought about it as my career path. In the magistracy then, before you could be considered for appointment as a High Court judge, you had to be at a particular level. You had to be a Chief Magistrate Grade 1. I was a Chief Magistrate Grade 2. So at that point, I hadn't started looking towards the bench or deciding what I wanted to do. But I was approached, as to whether I was interested. And initially, I was like, I'm not yet at that level, but it was pointed out to me that by the Constitution, I was already 10 years post-law, and therefore I was qualified to be a High Court judge. And so that was how I went through the process, and I was appointed a High Court judge. And again, while at the High Court bench, I served in different capacities along with my responsibilities as a judge. A few months after I was appointed chairman of Robbery and Firearms Tribunal. This was during the military era, and so I combined that with my normal official duties. Also was a member of different committees and so on and so forth while in the High Court. One of them particularly that I'm very proud of is that I was part of the committee that amended our civil procedure rules to introduce not only ADR as part of the process of initiating actions, but also simplified the way evidence was given in court to reduce time. So we introduced giving your evidence by affidavit. What used to happen before was that you had long trials and it took so long to get through the evidence of witnesses and so on. So when the rules were amended, we came out with new provisions which made your initial pleadings or the evidence you give, you just give it by affidavit, and you also front load your processes. So all the evidence you intend to rely on now had to be filed upfront so that right from the time the matter is filed, your opponent knows the case is going to meet, he knows the documents you're going to rely on, he can object to whatever he wants to object to. Before, it was almost like a game of hide and seek, and you are just surprised at the trial with certain documents and so on. So that's something I'm very proud of. I was also a member of the steering committee for what we call court-connected ADR, or the multi-house concept, multi-door courthouse. Now, what that was is a court-connected alternative dispute resolution center whereby other options were explored apart from litigation. So litigation was meant to be seen as the last resort and something that has now been adopted throughout the country. Going forward, again, I was approached again for elevation to the Court of Appeal. Now, in Nigeria, we have both state and federal judiciaries. So my first posting as a High Court judge was within Lagos State. So I was permanent in Lagos State. But for the Court of Appeal, it's a federal court that sits in divisions around the country. So initially, when I was approached for appointment to the Court of Appeal, I actually declined. And once again, the reason had to do with family. My youngest child then was just 6 years old, and I felt it would be quite disruptive for her if I took that appointment because it would mean serving in different parts of the country and the home base wouldn't be stable for her. My older sons were already in high school then. So on 2 occasions, I actually declined. It was on the 3rd occasion that I accepted, and that was how I was elevated to the Court of Appeal.
That's such an incredible journey. And I love hearing about how you had these 2 passions as a kid, and it like you really did kind of marry them together, your love of language and your passion for law, and thinking about how you had this young family and you were kind of navigating the system with that. And, we talk a lot about care and women's responsibilities, especially within the home. So it's really important for us to understand the way that shapes women's journeys. We've also heard you described as deeply committed to ethics, discipline, integrity. And I think you also served on some ethics committees and designed judicial trainings for employees.
Yeah,
What
yes.
do you believe are the core ethical values that must anchor judicial institutions today?
What I think are the core ethical values, accountability, honesty, transparency, and of course, respect for the rule of law. I believe that judicial office, or even if you are working not as a judicial officer, but even staff, you need to be principled. You need to be principled. You need to be able to, the right thing, whether you are being watched or not. You need to have that ingrained discipline. You do whatever is right, to obey the law, follow procedures, no matter what is, at stake. Because I believe personally that part of my own journey has been influenced by that. My upbringing was very strict. I was brought up by a mother who was a teacher, and she was actually known for being very strict, very firm. So this is one of the ways that I think my path was laid. And then the high school I attended also was known for strict discipline, and no matter who you were, because I attended a school where, even though it was a government school, you had children from all walks of life, which means you also had children from the highest level of society. And I remember the principal of our school at that time was so upright that no matter who you were, you had to obey the rules, whatever it was. For instance, if your parents happen to come to school, maybe to do something official, and you happen to see them, you are not allowed to go up to them because it wasn't visiting. And a funny thing that I will share with you is that growing up, my children, they've always said to me, because whenever we go places that are new, I want to know what are the rules, what are the do's and don'ts. Imagine going on holiday with children. Maybe you go to the swimming pool area, you go to the gym. I first stand and look at what the rules say, and they always say, "Oh, mommy, you're always reading the rules. You're always this. We should know what we can." I said, "No, it's always better know what the rules are and follow them." So it is something that has followed me throughout my career, and I have found that just as much as you can, if you stand on the straight and narrow, if you have integrity, if you are principled, it takes you places. It is, I feel, what is very essential for our judicial system, for people to have faith in the system. So these are some of the things: accountability, transparency. People need to understand what you are doing, have a window into what you are doing. It doesn't seem as if everything is cloaked in legal language and everything is obscure. So, and then definitely respect for the rule of law, I think, is very important.
Completely agree with this perspective of having that sense of transparency, but also for the public and communities to really understand what is happening in terms of the system itself. And as you very much stated, the need for judicial officers, whether they're being, as you said, watched or not, to have this ingrained sense of discipline, to be principled. And I love how that also ties in, it seems, to the way that you live your life and carry out just your role even as a parent and within your family. I think, adding to that, we would love to hear more about, since you've talked about the work that you've done in strengthening, I think, public trust in the judiciary, what do you think can be done in terms of continuing to bridge the gap, let's say, between courts and communities that they serve?
I think one important thing nowadays is how to leverage technology. There's a lot of mystery about the way court work, and so a lot more enlightenment probably using social media, even though I would say conservatively, we have to be careful about it. But I think it's a way to reach the people, because of social media, people are even more aware of their rights, and they feel they have more of a say in the way the system works, or at least they feel confident enough to comment on things, or to say, to give their own perspective on any issue that is of public concern. What I find is that in a lot of instances, people are not so clear on how the system works. And so there are certain outcomes that they expect. And when they don't get those outcomes, their understanding is that there must have been compromise. And that's not necessarily the case. With law, there are things that happen out there in the public, but when a matter comes to court, the facts that might be brought before you are not necessarily what is out there in the public domain. We also have the way we apply our rules to facts and situations, either procedural rules or substantive law to a situation. And if the public don't understand in as simple a manner as possible that this is the way the system works, it goes beyond even reasons for your decision. Because when you give reasons for your decision, you are still basing it on the law, your interpretation of the law, and your application of the law to the fact. But there are certain situations or certain considerations that the public may not necessarily understand. For instance, if a matter is resolved on an issue of law, where that issue of law is determinant of the whatever is in controversy, notwithstanding all the other facts that may be around that matter. So what I'm trying to do is to get our courts also. One of my focuses for the time I'm in office is to ensure that we are properly digitized, so that almost as soon as judgments are delivered, they are available online to the public. Also, where we can, to give short summaries of our decisions that just explain the basis for the decision that people can understand, and you get something from the court that can stand alongside whatever public discourse is going on. So basically what I'm trying to say is that I believe a lot more enlightenment, a lot more engagement with the public will do a lot to improve the way people see justice delivery. Also, training for our staff. We have a judicial institute, the National Judicial Institute, which organizes training for both judicial officers and our staff. And since our staff are often the first contact people have and the public has with the workings of the judiciary, it's equally important that our staff are well trained, and we even have specifically trained staff that can interface with the public on basic things. But because, when you have complaints about corruption and compromise in the judiciary, it's not only the judges that make up the judiciary. So these that interface with the public also need proper training and need to understand how some of their actions or inactions create a negative perspective of the judiciary. So I think better engagement, more enlightenment would help in bridging the gap.
Justice Kekere, that makes so much sense. And I know you don't necessarily know much about my life prior to IAWJ, but I used to work on court projects here in the States that were working to enact technological reforms in particularly civil courts. And it really does help bridge the gap with the public when there is more access to information, when things are more accessible in terms of being able to access the court document. It does help deliver justice that is more representative. And that's what I really hear you saying, talking about training staff, being the first contact with the public, and making sure that every facet of the court system is open and accessible and available to the public so that they can, yes, understand the workings of the courts, but also understand the justice that's being administered and feel like that justice is inclusive and representative of their experiences. And one thing that we talk a lot about when it comes to gender, especially, is making sure that women are on the bench so that that representation comes through in judgments and in decision making and in the way that justice is administered. In Nigeria, we know that the population is roughly evenly split between men and women. Women only make up about a third of judges at federal and state levels, and of course, even fewer in leadership roles. In your view, what's the biggest driver of this underrepresentation of women, particularly in leadership?
So, firstly, is that when you look at the bare figures, one may be right in saying that there's underrepresentation given the balance of our population and so on and so forth. But I would also like to say that I believe that where we are now shows actually significant growth from where we once were. because about, say, 30 years ago, judicial office was still seen mostly as a preserve of men. You hardly had women coming in. You had a few here and there, but mostly it was men. And one of the challenges, which is still a challenge today, is work-life balance and opportunity and so many other things. But what is happening in Nigeria today is that we are very fast moving towards a better balance, a better gender balance. Some states, we have 36 states in Nigeria and the Federal Capital Territory. Some states have made more progress than others, but there was a time also where, because remuneration of judicial officers was not very attractive, we found a lot of men not wanting to come onto the bench. So that gap was filled by women. And in some states now, you have even more women than men. And I will give Lagos State as an example. Lagos is the commercial capital of Nigeria, and that's where you have the most courts in one place, in one state. And presently, the female judges actually outweigh the men. And similarly, in Kano State, what is interesting about Kano State is that you also be aware that in Nigeria, we do have these various cultural differences. And the northern part of the country is more conservative than the south. But now we are having a lot more women judges being appointed. And I would also say that in recent times, in the last 2 years, 2023 to 2025, I served as the president of the National Association of Women Judges. And we had as our theme for the tenure, breaking down barriers for women in the legal profession. And what we decided to do was to hold workshops in the 6 geopolitical zones or geographical zones of the country. Now, what usually happens is that when we have workshops, they're often in one central place and participants travel down, but we thought that going to the different geographical areas will give us an idea of the challenges being faced in the different parts of the country, which are sometimes peculiar to that part of the country. So in doing that, we found that we were able to also provide enlightenment, and inviting heads of courts to this event, we found that it actually had a positive effect. So yes, we found that some states have started looking to appoint more females. Sometimes because of cultural concerns, there's an idea that if a female, cannot shoulder or take on all what it entails to be a judge, the working hours and so on, and the thinking that if she's a judge and has to work so hard and long hours, what happens to the home front? So there is, in some parts of the country that is and even for women in private practice as well, lawyers in chambers and things, we found that in some places, they are not even given the assignments just because they are women, and it is thought, all right, if this case is going to take you outside the state, it's going to affect, you may not be able to give it your best because your attention is divided between the home and the job and things like that. So generally speaking, finding that in different parts of the country, there is now a lot more encouragement for women to be in judicial office. And I also believe that because we have had some women who have broken the glass ceiling, quote unquote, the way these women have performed in those positions is what has encouraged the appointment of more women in this position, I feel. If you have women, and you have the same complaint, they are never on work, because they are taking one child here or they are taking a child to school or this and that. But I find that when I was appointed a High Court judge, my children were still young and I had school functions and things to do. And I was able to design my schedule in such a way that I was still able to balance both. I had time to do that, which did not affect my work. So I was able to function as well as any of my male counterparts. And I think this is what we are finding throughout the country. And now we have more and more women on the bench. So though we are still not where we want to be, I believe we are moving in the right direction.
I think that's such a wonderful way of kind of looking at this trajectory over the past few decades. And, you mentioned so many important points that as well in the Women in Leadership in Law Willow initiative that IWJ is implementing in conjunction and in partnership with the National Association of Women Judges Nigeria. We're looking at these questions of work-life balance that you've been able to also give us some insight into your own ways of managing them, right? And I think these are issues that so many women judges, both in Nigeria, but also the world and judiciaries are looking to address directly so that we can find pathways and solutions to promote women to higher levels. And you mentioned also this idea of visibility, right? When women have broken the glass ceiling, quote unquote, and have performed really well and has also been able to kind of master the work-life balance aspect of it, it encourages others to think, this is possible maybe also for myself.
And if I may add, even from the winning experience and our own, exercise with the women judges, Nigerian women judges, we've focused a lot on mentoring, being very, very important for even those aspiring to the bench. And I had just recently a young newly appointed judge actually came to me to ask me, that she just wants to know how to go on, or for me to advise her that she's a single mother of a young child, and she wanted to know, how did I combine my judicial office with managing my home and so on, and I had an opportunity to talk to her, mentor her, tell her how she can, try and manage her time and, schedule her work in such a way that she can do both. Because there's a story I tell. I bring in my family a lot because the last how many years of my life, this is what I've been doing. But my young daughter then, when I first became a judge, before I became a judge, I'd had a lot more time, taking the children for the various activities they needed to go for and things like that. And when I became a judge, I didn't have that time for her. She was more affected because the older ones were already in high school, so they were okay. But she, and one time she looked at me and, she was very upset. I was busy. She wanted me to take her somewhere. I told her I was writing a judgment, right? She slept. She woke up and she said, all right, can we go now? And I said, I'm still busy. She just looked at me and she said, I don't know why they made you a judge. Now, didn't they know you have children? And this was a 6-year-old. And that made me feel so bad. I felt so terrible. So what I then did was to start to organize my time such that I spent as much time as I could at work, or at least did as much as I could at work, so that when I got home, I had the complete focus for her. And that has really helped me. And she was also my consideration when I was being considered for elevation to the Court of Appeal. Because again, that entailed going, posting around the country. She was still the one at home, and I felt she would still be the one to be affected. So I felt that in terms of my career, I still had a way to go, but the formative years of your child are limited, and you want to be there to have the influence that you need to have on your child at that stage. So I was able to give her advice anyway. Just find ways of scheduling your time so that you can still make time for your child. So this is also a very important aspect. And what I've tried to do is wherever I find myself, especially with women judges, I take them in groups or whatever and just mentor and advise and let them understand that we are really a beacon for those coming behind. And it's how we carry ourselves, it's how we function in these positions that would either encourage or discourage more appointments. So we have to, really give it our best and see how we can balance things so that it doesn't, take away from our effectiveness on the job.
It's wonderful to, again, understand, and we're so grateful for you to be able to share these personal experiences that have really helped you in terms of navigating, again, what we understand and working in several different countries and jurisdictions and with our members around the world is something that, so many women struggle in trying to understand how to have that work-life balance. And especially as women with younger families ascending to the bench. One of the initiatives that we're looking at in terms of the Willow Initiative in Nigeria is potentially the use of creches throughout courthouses for judicial officers in light of thinking about how to provide opportunities for working mothers, parents in general. What are maybe some other workplace policies or support systems that you think could help retain and promote women during these kind of early young family stages?
Well, I think nowadays, because of the experience we had with COVID, I think this is an area we can also look at in terms of working virtually where this is possible, so that even if you are not able to be physically in the courtroom, you can still get your work done. That involves obviously connectivity and so many other things, but it is, I believe, one of the ways to go, that it makes it more flexible for, especially if you are working as a single judge sitting on your own. You can be a bit more flexible. If you are sitting as a panel, there will be some challenges there. But I believe that this is one of the things we can look at, that what COVID has taught us is that there are quite a few things we can do without being physically in the place. And this also helps where, for instance, you have, in Nigeria in particular, we often have challenges with criminal trials because sometimes it's difficult to convey those awaiting trial to the courtroom and things like that. So if you can work virtually, if you can, they don't have to come to the courtroom, and you can still, take your case virtually, hear the evidence, and even the witnesses, that, because that's another area of delay. Sometimes it's the witnesses that they are not able to get. Prosecutors have been moved to different parts of the country. So I think virtual hearing is one of the ways in which things can be made more flexible for women.
Yeah, and that really harkens back to what you were saying before about, digitizing the courts and making things more accessible online as well. And the more that we can kind of modernize and make it so that people can access the court documents, whether it's virtually. That includes judges too, right? We talk a lot about judges for people. Judges have lives outside the bench, beyond the bench, if you will.
Yes.
So I think that all makes complete sense. And COVID really did shift our world and show us opportunities, right? As tragic as it was, it really elucidated a lot of opportunities, and I think is showing us what could be possible. I was wondering if we could shift a little bit and talk a little bit more about maybe some of the women or even individuals that mentored you. You were talking about mentorship and being a person for those who come behind, and who maybe mentored you or inspired you in your leadership, and how did those relationships shape your understanding of justice, integrity, and service?
Thank you. So for me, I wouldn't say I've had direct mentors per se, because I believe that mentoring is, apart from having that interpersonal relationship, a person can mentor you from afar, just from the way they carry out their duties, the way they do their jobs and so on, and what they represent. So for me, I would say our first female Chief Justice of Nigeria, Honorable Justice Mariam Aluma Mukhtar, I would say is somebody that I really admire. First of all, she's a woman of many firsts. Almost every stage of her career, she was the first to do it. So she was the first female to be appointed a judge in her state. She was the first female to become a Justice of the Court of Appeal. She was the first female to be appointed to the Supreme Court. So there are so many things she's done, and all that follows her, or what she's known for, is her integrity, her uprightness, being very hardworking. So she really broke a glass ceiling for so many of us. She also, for me, it represents resilience, because, as I mentioned earlier, at a point in time in Nigeria, judicial office was seen to be the preserve of men, and particularly the Supreme Court. So she actually spent about 18 years as a Justice of the Court of Appeal, not because she wasn't qualified to be appointed to the Supreme Court, but because it was believed that the Supreme Court was for men. So she spent that long in the Court of Appeal. But when she got to the Supreme Court, she proved her worth and to the, eventually becoming the first female Chief Justice of Nigeria. So if you think of a woman coming into that environment for the first time in the history of the country and holding your own, I think it is something that, is worthy of emulation. And in a lot of things that I do even now, because even though her tenure was from 2012 to 2014, there are so many things that people still refer to concerning her. So for me, some of the things I do or decisions I take, I think to myself, if she were in this position, what would she do? How would she do it? So she has been a mentor to me in that way. She has also been a mentor to me in the sense that she has supported me even when in my absence, so to say. So things that have concerned me, where she felt there was being some injustice, she spoke out for me, even though we didn't have a personal relationship. But she too was aware of the reputation I had built in terms of my approach to my work. And that was what she was defending. That whoever it is that is doing, the job the way it should be done should not be shortchanged for a reason that has nothing to do with the person's ability to do the job. So that is one. We also have our first female senior advocate of Nigeria, Mrs. Folake Sholanke. She also, I find, to be a mentor from a distance also, because she has the courage of a member of the profession. She has the dignity, she has the poise, she has the diction. She too has stood her own. She has been a leader, worthy of emulation in every aspect. And, a quintessential lawyer, I would say, in every respect. So these are some of the people that I admire, and I try to model myself to an extent on them.
This goes back to, I think, so much of why representation matters. And as you mentioned, mentorship can be from afar, right? It can be about seeing someone that's holding a position, how they hold that position, the work that they do, the barriers they've broken, and how inspiring that can be on so many different levels. I also love the fact that, as you said, defending and upholding also and showing some solidarity, it seems, for you in your position now as Chief Justice. That's a wonderful way that we think that networks and ways that women can really uphold one another and support one another in their journeys and in their leadership.
A recent example of a young girl who was just about to finish her bar exams, and she came for, there's a form that we fill as benchers. So senior members of the profession are members of the body of benchers that is responsible for admitting new lawyers to the bar. So when they come, we have a little interview with them, and this young lady was pregnant, and I asked her, what she wanted to do, once she qualified, and she said, she'd work for a little bit, and then she'd, stay home and look after her children. So I said, why do you want to do that? I said, it's possible to look after your children and still continue with your career. And in the legal profession, your age at the bar is very important. So if you stay home, you will be losing out a lot. And at that time, I was on the brink of becoming the acting Chief Justice. So I asked her then, I said, do you know that the current Chief Justice is about to retire? She said, yes. So I said, do you know who will be stepping into his shoes? She said she didn't know. So I said, well, by the grace of God and operation of law, I should be, stepping in an acting capacity. And she just started crying. So I was surprised. I said, why? What's wrong? Why are you crying? And she said she just never knew it was possible that for a woman to become the Chief Justice of Nigeria, she never believed it was possible. So that was really a teaching moment for me, and for her to see, and this is what we are saying about representation, about mentoring, that even if she never meets me again, the fact that she's met somebody once that was on the cusp of becoming the Chief Justice of Nigeria, when she thought perhaps she had just obtained her degree, maybe even to satisfy her parents that she's got an education, and then she thought she would just go and sit down and be looking after her children. So on the bench as women, there are a lot of things that we represent to those coming behind. And this is why we ourselves have to make sure that we carry the position in the best way we can, because that's the only way to encourage those coming behind.
100% agree. And it's so wonderful for you to, again, give us another example, personal example of how, the words of encouragement, representation, visibility are so key, and why we also believe at IWJ that our national associations really play such a central in reaffirming women judges' ability to kind of rise and thrive, and how networks can really be leveraged. We'd love to hear more about, you've led the National Association of Women Judges Nigeria. What are some of the things that you think, associations like NowGen to mentor, sponsor, and really promote more women for top judicial roles?
Well, again, a lot of engagement. So we've also created group like WhatsApp groups and so on and so forth, because there are some members of the profession, just because of the way our profession is structured and seniority and so on, that some more junior members would never have the courage to come up to a more senior judge or share some of the ideas that they have. But when you have these like social media platforms, let's say something like a WhatsApp, where you can share experiences in the way you've handled a particular matter, and then, people can chip in, whether they are senior judges or whatever it is. You learn a lot from that. And even just today, I passed a comment on a conversation that was going on, and I was saying how happy I was that there was a lot of input from judges from different, different levels of the hierarchy, explaining what they would do in a similar situation, which had to do with fundamental rights, how long a person should be kept in custody while awaiting trial for an offense which is not it's not a capital offense, it's not I would say it's not a serious offense, but that the kind of things you are supposed to think about when making such decisions, the length of time the person should be in custody before having the opportunity to come to court. So there was quite an interesting dialogue that was going on among the judges, and I actually had to step in and just commend them that this is what this is all about, that this is another way that we mentor each other, we guide each other, we share ideas, and we also have heads of courts on these, so they can also see sometimes areas where they can make improvements, do things in a different way that they may not even have thought about, but because of these interactions, anything to do with the National Association of Women Judges, it allows that networking. And what we've also done is that whenever we've had any of these events, we've invited magistrates, we've invited members of the profession that are not judges, because they too have experiences to share, either being on the receiving end as lawyers in court or in other organizations, their own experiences as well. And it encourages and makes you see what is possible as a member of the legal profession, because when we're talking about breaking leadership barriers, we are not only talking about on the bench, we are talking about in professions generally. We want to see women lawyers succeeding in whatever field they find themselves. So this kind of engagement that bring people together from different organizations, different women organizations and so on, they actually have a very great impact on judges generally or women generally, because the women too who are not on the bench, some are encouraged to, seek appointment to the bench, even though they never considered it before. So these are some of the things that I think and we also have the opportunity through the IAWJ to network with judges and judicial officers from other jurisdictions as well. And that's also another opportunity of sharing ideas, see where some people are doing things better than what you are doing and the perspective you can bring to it. One of the things I have found interesting is when we share ideas about using international laws and conventions in promoting human rights or protecting human rights. And you see how sometimes there are very creative ways in which judges have been able to use these conventions alongside the domestic laws to ensure that human rights are properly protected, and especially when it comes to gender-based issues as well.
I think that makes so much sense. And I think you speak so beautifully about what we at IAWJ hope our stations represent and what we hope we as an organization represent, right? Like finding ourselves in community with each other, whether it's via a WhatsApp group on the opportunities that we're able to come together in person. But I think that, again, it's about that accessibility, not just to the courts, but to each other and being in community with each other and being able to share our own stories and share our own experiences of what it's like to be a woman in leadership in law. You're the fifth and youngest female to be appointed to Nigeria's Supreme Court. And of course, now our Chief Justice. And I was wondering if you could maybe tell us a little bit more. Do you believe that women bring a unique lens to the administration of justice? And perhaps how has your perspective as a woman shaped your work on the bench?
Certainly, I believe women do bring a different lens. Again, if you talk about gender-based violence in particular, I think what women are able to bring to the table is an understanding which they're able to share with male counterparts on the emotional effect of gender-based violence, which cannot be assuaged by monetary compensation. Now, a lot of times, the perception in the past has been, when these things happen, even when reports are made to the police and all that, it's at the end of the day, the man has apologized or the family has come round to apologize, or they will put the person who has been assaulted on the defensive in the sense that they now say things like, all right, if you pursue this case to its logical conclusion, do you want to put your family breadwinner in jail? Is that your goal? Without thinking of the emotional toll such action have on the victim and that remain with the victim throughout his or her life, because it's not only women. And the fact that the experience can change who that person eventually becomes in society. So I feel that women have that lens whereby if such matters come, you can also look at it from that perspective. And if you are in a position where you are sitting with a panel and you have male counterparts, you can also let them see this perspective, which they might not otherwise see. There is also just the fact that we have some innate sensibilities that we can bring to bear to the job. That is just different just because of the way we are made as women. And at the same time, we are not going to jettison the law just because we have empathy for somebody who finds themselves in this kind of position. And in certain cases, we can be a little softer in certain respects. In certain cases, we can be firmer in ensuring that justice is done. So women certainly have a different perspective. Or even if you are talking about, it could be a divorce matter, the welfare of the children, those sort of considerations probably has a better way of seeing those things. I'm not saying that the men who cannot do justice in such matters, but I believe that women do have a unique perspective that they can bring to the table. And I feel that for myself personally, my trajectory has been such that, generally speaking, I haven't dealt much with cases of domestic violence and so on. That is at the High Court level. But at the appellate level, in terms of decisions that now come on appeal, the one is able to guide where necessary, just show a different perspective of some of these matters. Like I said, when you explain certain things and you say, if you look at it this way, if you see, what is the condition in the home, what is this? So it's not always black and white. And I feel a lot of times our male counterparts see things more in black and white, when we are able to provide that extra layer of consideration. And I think that for the users of the court system, when they see more women on the bench, they feel that representation, they feel the balance, and they feel you see them, you hear them, and you can actually understand where they're coming from.
I think exactly that, again, going back into our conversation where we talked about visibility and that encouragement for those that are serving, as well as the importance of the representation for those court users, who they see and how they feel. Also, that representation gives that wider perspective, because it is about also the wholeness of the society, right? A society is made up of men and women, and it's quite essential. You have a level of representation that really serves to give the whole viewpoint of experiences from a particular nation. So, Justice Kekere-Ekun, we do have a final question that we like to ask all of our panelists and all of our guests, and we'll ask you now. In one word, if you can, what do you think will have the greatest impact on advancing women's leadership in law?
One word.
It could be one phrase too, if you want.
What I would say is that diversity on the bench instills confidence in the populace. Yes, if you have diversity, people see themselves represented, they have more confidence, and there is also a belief that it's more difficult to approach women in terms of, all these allegations of corruption and things like that. So people have more confidence. And so when you have women there, they are more likely to be upright. They are more likely to have the integrity that is required. They'll be more difficult to approach, to bend the rule. And so it's more representation. I think that's what is important. If you have a society because at the end of the day, we women are part of the society. You can't have a society without women. So how can we have a system meting out justice that consists mainly of men? Anybody comes into court, some people already feel their case is lost because the people they see up there, they don't see themselves represented. They don't think they can understand what their true challenges are. So I would say that diversity is what will instill more confidence in the populace, and more appointment in that regard, I think, would be much better for the judiciary.
Absolutely. The importance of seeing yourself represented and knowing that justice is for you as well, and that the people that are hearing you, that are seeing you, can understand your perspective because they understand it, because they've lived it. And I think that's just so powerful. So thank you so much. Thank you so much, Chief Justice Kekere-Ekun. Your life and your career exemplify the values of integrity, diversity, and determined leadership. And decades of service across every level of Nigeria's judiciary, you have helped shape a justice system that strives to be more transparent, ethical, and representative, and responsive to the people that it serves, and continue to show the ways in which women can and do shape the bench. And we're so grateful for you sharing your story with us. You have broken barriers that once seemed immovable, proving that women not only belong in the halls of power, but that their voices, perspective, and leadership make the judiciary stronger, fairer, and more humane. You've inspired women in Nigeria and across the world to see themselves in roles they might have thought were out of reach, that they too can shape the law and serve their communities at the higher levels. So thank you for your steadfast commitment to justice and your trailblazing service, and for paving the way for future generations of jurists in Nigeria and beyond. Thank you for joining us today so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me, and it's been a pleasure.
Thank you for tuning into Justice Beyond the Bench. If you enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Want to learn more about our work and support our mission? Visit us at iawj.org, where you can explore our programs, join our global network, or make a donation to help advance gender equity in judiciaries around the world. See you next time.